Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. So I had the pleasure of being invited to and participating in a crazy new game mode for Genshin Impact. In this video, we'll take a look at this competition, and also, I want to hear what you guys think about this format. So what are we even watching? Back on October 3rd, the Golden House reached out to me and asked if I wanted to participate in a collaboration with Tony 2. Naturally, I said of course. And that collaboration was Tony 2's idea of having 2 speedrunners from China and 2 speedrunners not from China compete in an Abyss 12 speedrunning competition. Each team will have 1 player from China and 1 player from Global. The teams ended up being SZS Windy and myself, I Win to Lose, versus SS Sawamura and Critto. Starting off, there were a lot of rules and restrictions in this competition. If you guys have ever played League of Legends competitively, there's a draft pick system that this was somewhat based off of. Basically, each team would take turns picking and banning various characters and weapons in an effort to make the experience as terrible as possible for the other team. Unlike traditional pick-ban processes though, we picked some characters for the other team to be forced to use as well. The next restrictions were on gear. Because all the participants here are massive whales, to make it even more interesting, there were some severe gear limitations. Each team could only have 3 5-star weapons and 10 max leveled artifacts distributed between all 8 characters. All the other artifacts needed to be at level 1. Also, each character can only equip 2 level 20 artifacts. That way, our characters and builds are incredibly neutered. Here is an example of a build in this competition with only 2 level 20 artifacts. Yeah, not pretty. Funnily, I had to go farm some level 1 artifacts just for this competition. Anyway, on to the ban pick process. It's to no one's surprise that the top tier support characters like Kazuha, Bennett, and Venti were immediately banned. Should any team actually end up getting those characters and the other team didn't get those characters, that would spell an instant game over. I also ended up banning the Dull Blade just for fun because the cutscene Traveler is too OP. Funny story, I had no idea how the ban pick system actually worked at this point, and it was mostly Wendy who had the experience with the ban pick system. He ended up choosing his preferred team of Xingqiu and Hu Tao to secure that DPS core. Then we ended up choosing characters for the other team to use. Naturally, don't we all want to see Aloy and Razor in action? Meanwhile, our team was stuck with Barbara and Noelle. Moving past the rest of the ban pick process, here are the final teams. I decided I wanted to use Raiden and Yoimiya for this competition, so I chose them. Now let's finally get started with the runs. This was done in the previous Abyss cycle. Starting off with my run for 12-1-1, there's a super interesting mechanic for Yoimiya's burst that I learned in this run. Her burst launches these 2 samurai guys, and with pristine positioning, you're able to hit 3 of these guys at the beginning with Raiden's burst. Then you're left with the stragglers all over the place, and Yoimiya is actually amazing at disposing of random stragglers.
I guess Raiden and Yoimiya like fill in each other's downtime, like a dual carry kind of thing.
Yeah.
Doing the burst, and then we're starting rotation 2. Pretty good energy economy. Everyone's been able to burst.
Now the second part is also interesting because Raiden's burst's hitbox, being only in front of her, makes it nearly impossible to hit all the enemies without an animo character, end up making a huge impact on these runs. This run took me 45 seconds to complete. Next we have Sawa's run. Funnily enough, Aloy actually provides a lot of cryoparticles for Eula. Also, Sawa intentionally killed this treasure hoarder here on the outskirts first. This removes one of the treasure hoarders that would normally be a problem to group, while also allowing the other mobs to close in. But despite Sawa's best efforts, it's nearly impossible to nail the ranged treasure hoarders all at once, because they stand so far away from you.
Really RNG dependent for Eula, because her first AoE is just so restricted. And it's impossible to get these guys grouped up without a dedicated grouper. But still doing pretty good. This guy's taking a bit of time.
Regardless, this gives him time to build energy for a second round of Eula's burst, and this is also where a circular AoE around your character is hugely beneficial. But I can only imagine how many tries this took, because of all the crits needed as well as the massive RNG on all the mobs gathering up. This run took 49 seconds for Sawa. And now we move on to the second half of Abyss 12-1, where my teammate Wendy took Hu Tao and Xingqiu. In retrospect, without any form of freeze or petrification, this chamber is an absolute nightmare if you cannot one-shot the mobs instantly. The specters are just bouncing around all the time and the Animo Wind Spirit flies up into the sky. I actually think Yoimiya might have done better here compared to Hu Tao, especially since the Staff of Homa was banned. Hu Tao is using the Dragon's Bane, and Amber is thus using the other 5-star weapon, the Elegy for the End. Combined with the single target nature of Hu Tao's charge attacks, this meant basically taking out each enemy one by one. If there are similar events in the future where weapons can be banned, certain characters will absolutely struggle more than others. Hu Tao in particular loses around 30% of her damage without the Staff of Homa, and realistically probably she loses 40% due to the lack of a crit substat on the Dragon's Bane. This was a really interesting learning experience, and the early Hu Tao pick actually hurt our team in the long run, because of course the Staff of Homa is going to get banned.
Well, to break that Geo Shield, so it's not the worst.
Oh,
the C6 coming in clutch there. Fortunately, doesn't get to take advantage of it. He had to swap off right after, but that was very clutch. Slow, okay.
Yeah, he needed to use burst there. His C6 probably ran out.
I think it disappears when you swap off as well. Now, surprised he hasn't swapped to Noelia. There it is. And that shield quickly goes away. And then standard Hu Tao stuff. Hu Tao Amber is actually a very, very good combination, especially when you have Elegy on your Amber, which I assume...
This run took Wendy 107 seconds to complete. Now for Critto's run with Ayaka. Sucrose is an amazing pick for this format as she doesn't need artifacts and can provide a massive buff and damage from Viridescent Veneer and the Thrilling Tales. Also, Zhongli ended up being an amazing pick here because while the specters are approaching, there's almost no opportunity cost to use Zhongli's long burst animation to crowd control the specters once they get in range. Then, well, you guys know the drill by now, and you guys know how broken Ayaka's burst is. This cut off a colossal amount of time in comparison to Wendy's Hu Tao's run. Also interesting to note, while Hu Tao doesn't have a good 5-star weapon option outside of Staff of Homa, Ayaka does. The Primordial Jade Cutter is about a 20% loss in damage, and even less than that because it has an outrageous amount of crit rate. When you have bad artifacts like we all did in this competition, crit substats become far more valuable, and thanks to the Blizzard Strayer and the Primordial Jade Cutter, Ayaka is still able to essentially maintain 100% crit rate. Critto blitzed past Wendy's 107 second time with his 56 second time, putting Team Baron Bunny 56 seconds behind Team Guoba. So can Team Baron Bunny catch up? Let's take a look at my 12-2-1 run. My team here has pretty good single target DPS, having Yoimiya on it. But despite that, Raiden in burst mode is just going to do a lot more damage. And with Mona support, she is able to one-cycle the first phase of Magukenki, even with all the restrictions in place. Now this is also where a dual carry setup becomes extremely valuable. With Barbara of all things buffing Yoimiya, Yoimiya was able to do a huge amount of damage to Magukenki while allowing Mona and Raiden to charge their bursts. Then, with the attack buff from Yoimiya's burst, all the buffs from Mona, Raiden was able to quickly finish off the Magukenki. Now you may have noticed that I took damage on Yoimiya and Raiden, and that was completely intentional, as you'll see in the next chamber. My 12-2-1 run ended up at 47 seconds. Next we have Sawa's Eula run. If you recall from his 12-1-1 run, Eula ended the chamber with her burst, and thus doesn't have her burst up. Fortunately, he does have 2 cryo batteries, and finally manages to fill up Eula's burst. Also, ironically, Razor contributed quite a bit thanks to his Electro Element and ability to apply Superconduct throughout this run. But despite the double sacrificial weapons on both Diona and Aloy, Eula still isn't able to get her burst back up immediately, especially against an enemy like the Magukenki, who doesn't drop many orbs in comparison to the treasure hoarders.
Kinky. There it is. He's got the Sackbow on Aloy. Probably a Sackbow on Diona as well. Or Fav. Now it's just an issue of getting energy back for Eula. Even with 2 batteries, uptime on this burst is looking a bit rough.
Yeah.
It is finally.
Kenki doesn't drop many HP orbs. You don't get too much energy on him.
Ooh, I have to go for another rotation here. Very tragic.
And here we can see their third 5-star weapon of choice was on Razor of all things, using the Wolf's Gravestone to buff the entire party here. Unfortunately, Eula's normal attacks were severely lacking with only 2 +20 artifacts, and Sawa had to use a third Eula burst to finish off the Makukenki, putting his time at 83 seconds. And here we're able to close some of the lead. Now we have my teammate Windy's run. Windy ain't gonna wait for the Mirror Maiden to teleport to him, so he smacks the Cryo Mage across the map to the Mirror Maiden. Might I add that his Hu Tao dash cancels are very impressive here, with each one positioning him and the Cryo Mage closer to her friend, the Mirror Maiden. You may be wondering why even bother switching to Noelle, and I believe it's because he had the Archaic Petra equipped on her.
Second rotation here. Things up.
Another thing to note is that he waited on Xingqiu's elemental skill to be back up before finishing off the Mirror Maiden, as it is extremely important for Xingqiu's burst to be available at the start of the next chamber. Funnily enough, the Blessings of the Abyss Moon, or whatever they're called, helped a lot here, providing a lot of free sustained DPS for Hu Tao. In the end, this took him 45 seconds to complete. Next we have Critto's Ayaka run for 12-2-2. Starting this off, Critto is funneling energy to top off Ayaka's energy for her delete button burst. Now keep in mind that the Cryo Mage heavily resists cryo, but thankfully Zhongli and Sucrose provide 60% resistance shred, and they also provide just enough crowd control when used together to keep the mages close enough for Ayaka's burst to nearly take both of them out.
It's definitely more important.
However, both of the enemies managed to survive here and ended up on the opposite sides of the map. Nonetheless, this ends up being a good opportunity for Critto to fill up all his bursts in preparation for the dreaded 12-3-2. Critto ended up with a 42-second clear time for 12-2-2. The 56-second lead that they have in 12-1 was closed to 14 seconds. Can Team Baron Bunny close the last gap in the last chamber? Also, if you remember from 12-2-1, I took a lot of damage on Yoimiya and Raiden on purpose so they could capitalize on the 60% attack card while under 50% HP. Yoimiya opens up this fight and is able to do all of her DPS without her burst. This does enough damage for both the Rune Guards to force them to drop their energy orbs, which fills up the entire team's energy. 12-3-1 was completed in 21 seconds. Can Sawa maintain their lead? Similar to I Win to Lose, Sawa also started this chamber without Eula's burst, but what I'm curious about here is why he didn't use a second Diona hold E at the beginning. Well, anyway, I'm sure he has his reasons. Razor was actually critical here as a superconduct support, removing 40% of the Rune Guard's 70% resistance. Well, we all know what happens once Eula has her burst back up. Death. Sawa completed this in 25 seconds. Now the gap has been closed to just 10 seconds. Can Windy and his Dragon's Bane Hu Tao close the gap? But to find out, you're gonna have to watch the original video to see who comes out on top in the end. Did Team Baron Bunny manage to close the gap and clutch the victory? Or did Team Guoba manage to maintain their lead and take home the trophy? 12-3-2 begins at the 16-minute and 10-second mark, by the way, and the link to the original video will be in the pinned comment. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed this competition. As for me, well, I personally had a blast. This was a really refreshing and unique way to play Genshin Impact, in a way that I normally would never play it. Would this be a game mode you'd like to see miHoYo actually implement in some fashion, or is it best done like this, by the community? And lastly, some spoilers, but I participated in another competition similar to this one, also organized by the Golden House, so stay tuned for that sometime in the future. And be sure to give a huge thumbs up for the Golden House staff that made this video possible. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.